5 or 6 babies per each woman in order to keep. Now today with today's medicine, any society has to have 2.1 babies per woman to keep the population steady. And there's not one Western society that's doing that, not one. This is in the world history book that we're talking about now. But for the American Indians, with their medicine being what it was, they should have had 5 or 6 babies per woman. Now, there was one tribe that did, the Sioux. The Sioux women averaged 8 babies per woman. And in short order, they started taking over the Great Plains. They moved the other Indians out. They swooped down, starting out in Minnesota, and they took over much of the Great Plains because they had the people do it. All right. Now, the Indians never developed the wheel, and again, it wasn't lack of intelligence, it's just simply they didn't seem to need it. They never had the wheel. Now, here's some other things. They didn't have, I already mentioned, they didn't have large beasts of burden. Didn't have the horse, didn't have the pig, the chicken, the sheep, the goat, the camel, the ox, cattle. No, they had none of this. Among plants, they didn't have grains, they didn't have wheat, oats, rye, and barley. Stuff that might have made, now they did have the turkey, they did have the deer, they had the buffalo, some of them. And they had corn. Now south of the border they had tapioca, coffee, sugars, gourds, squash. Well, there's gourds, squash is often used to make gourds. They had the squash, they had the turkey. But their diet was not what it might have been. Again, had trade with European. All right. Now, something else that I got into a discussion with one of my pupils one time. I mean, he was in another classroom. He sat right over there, and he got upset with me because I said that there are more trees in North America today than there were in 1492. This is proven to be true. You might say, how's that? Well, if you look on page 18 of your book, the American Indians set fires and burned away millions of acres of land. That made an impact on the environment. You might wonder, why did they burn the land? Well, I don't know if they burned it deliberately, if it burned by itself. The Indians did not have the means to fight fires that we do. Now, fires have made big news last year. My son went to Oregon for a few weeks, and he breathed smoke almost all the time he was there, and he finally came back. Oregon was not to his liking. We cannot control a fire today that gets big. Right here in Georgia, down in the Okefenokee Swamp, we had some fires a few years ago, and the smoke from those fires reached all the way up here to Atlanta. The Okefenokee Swamp is down the Georgia-Florida border, right away. Fires. If they had not burned away the land, they'd have probably been burned up, but also they might have there might have been an accident if the land was burned away. Now, about the trees, have any of you flown over the southeast United States in an airplane and looked down? Any of you, by any chance? What do you see in one word? I mean, if you're flying high over the United States and look down, if you can see anything, you see trees. Acres and acres and acres and acres and acres of trees. I mean, just trees. And that today I had the argument with him. He acted up my head and walked out of class. But he came back the next time. He was an A student. I mean, you know. But, I mean, you don't have to agree with me. But I told the whole class, on my way home, I tried to find out if I could see any trees between here and my home in Powder Springs. I couldn't count them. I had to keep my eye on the road with Parkville. There are trees all over the place, even in metropolitan Atlanta. Just trees galore. Trees, 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 and more trees. I want to say this about the fires though out west. They decided, due to liberalism, that they would not clear away the dead trees, that they would not clear away the undergrowth, and they would not clear away the land next to the roads. And when the fire started, they could not control them. What is needed, one thing, that's for every superhighway they have, they ought to clear the land on 100 feet each side. But wouldn't that kill a bunch of trees? I say, the fires are going to kill them anyway. But the way to stop these fires is to every highway you have, clear the land on 100 feet of each side. When a fire starts, the road will stop it. So you see the logic, you understand the logic I'm using. Yeah, I think that would work. So do a bunch of other people. But just letting the trees grow right next to the road, and then the fire comes to the road, and the fire just jumps right over the road and goes to the other side. The road serves as no barrier. Hey, let the road serve as a barrier. Clear away the trees. I mean the ones that's near the road. All right, now, all right. Now, one thing about your Indians that I must mention because it become important later, you never hear the American Indians being called soldiers. Oh, they were fighters. They were warriors. They were called braves, like our Atlanta Braves. They're called braves. What's the difference between a soldier and a brave? A soldier fights organized. A soldier fights as a team. Now the Indians' way of fighting, they go into battle, and each brave would look around, he's my size, let me take him on. They'll take on someone their own size. If someone bigger than them approached them, they could always run. They take on someone their own size, and one of them would finish the other one off. Then the winner, he'd look around and, who else can I fight? Find someone else to fight, and fight him a while, and look around. Soldiers lined up in a line, and you can't fight one of them without fighting all of his buddies. You don't take on any one of them. They lined up in a line in a straight wall. The reason that came up, it became important later, was General Pershing in World War I would not take American Indians into his army. Believe it or not, the Indians were upset because it made them feel like they were inferior, but he did wind up taking them as signal soldiers. The reason I may know that is I was a signal soldier myself in the Army. I like radio and I am operator. But anyway, he took them in as signal soldiers because they could speak their native tongue, and Pershing had learned Navajo as a young man. So he could talk to an Indian in another company miles away in Navajo, and if the Germans picked it up, not one German knew Navajo. Not one German knew any of the Indian languages. So he took them in as signals, where they could talk to each other over the radio or over the telephone, and if the Germans were tapping into the phone line and hear this Cherokee talking to another Cherokee in the Cherokee language, not one German could interpret. And the same thing was largely true, but what the Germans hadn't learned, they need to fight America, they better learn the American Indian languages, which they didn't. So he wound up taking them in. I mean, the Indians, don't get me wrong, they had courage, but they did not have organization. All right. Now, the population appears to have been declining. Their lifespan appears to have been declining. Basically, the point I want to make, folks, is we think of society as being, it gets better, it gets better and better as time goes on. Now, during my lifetime, that's been true. The car I drove in is better than the car my dad ever had. He died in 1985. He never had a car as good as mine. The last two cars he bought were brand new. Today's cars are better. My dad lived to see me buy my first computer. He never owned one, never learned anything about them. Today, the computer I have is so much better than the one I used to have that I finally threw the one first computer into the trash. It was taking up space that I didn't need anymore. Nobody would buy it. Nobody wanted it, so I threw it in a dump. But the American Indians were going this way with their culture. a lot of history, we find humanity heading south in their culture for various reasons. Going up is not the natural order, folk. The natural order is going downhill. If you see water going uphill, it's because it's pushed, it's under pressure. Leave water to its natural devices, it flows downhill. Water does not flow upstream. Culture, left to its devices, will flow downstream. Now, about lifespan, I want to say this, then I'll have to move on. For the first time in American history, the average lifespan of the Americans is declining. The average age of death, and I see one person nodding your head like you've heard this. The problem may be opioids. Two problems, opioids and suicide.